I was not asleep. I know how to fake it. I learned that in the Army, 4 days into basic, when the sergeant would walk the barracks at 11 at night, and you needed him to believe you were out cold. Slow your breathing. Let your jaw go slack. Keep your eyes from tracking under the lids. That kind of stillness is a discipline, and once you learn it, you never quite forget it. So when Lydia's side of the bed shifted at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning, I did not flinch. I did not change my breathing. I let my left hand rest exactly where it was, loose on the sheet, and I watched through my eyelashes as she sat up. She did not look at me right away. Most people would. Most people, getting out of bed in the middle of the night while their spouse is sleeping, would glance over at them out of habit. She did not glance. She slid her legs over the side of the mattress with the slow care of someone who had been practicing this movement, and she stood without making the floor creak. She knows how to do that. The only spot on the floor that doesn't creak is the narrow strip along the baseboard on her side. She found it during a bout of insomnia 2 years ago, and I thought at the time it was funny, the way she made a little mental note of it, filed it away. I found it less funny at 12 minutes past 2 on a Tuesday in March, standing in my bedroom in the dark, not looking at me, moving toward the closet. My name is Ferdinand. I am 38 years old. I have run my own logistics consulting business for 6 years, which means I have spent 6 years measuring the cost of things, the cost of a bad route, the cost of a delayed shipment, the cost of trusting a partner who is moving slower than they should be without telling you why. I have learned to read delays. I have learned to read slow movements. I have learned that when something is moving very carefully in the dark, it is moving carefully for a reason. The closet door slid open. She was good at that too. And then there was light. Not the overhead light. Her phone screen, turned down to almost nothing, just the faintest wash of blue-white in the dark. She was holding it low. She was pointing it at the safe. The safe has sat on the upper shelf of that closet for 4 years. It is a mechanical combination dial safe, the kind with a spin wheel and 3 numbers you have to hit in sequence, because when I bought it, I did not trust electronic safes, and I do not trust them now. It holds a few things I do not need often and do not want to lose. I never gave Lydia the combination. I told her once, early on, that it was mostly firearm paperwork and some old documents, nothing she would ever need to get into. She accepted that without asking further. Or I thought she had. She was photographing the dial. Not the safe itself, not the shelf, not scanning the room. She had the phone held at a specific distance and angle, making small adjustments the way a person does when they are trying to capture something precisely. She took what I counted as 4 separate photos, maybe 5. Then she straightened up. She took one long, slow breath. She pointed the phone down toward the floor, killing the last of the light, and she walked back to bed. The floorboard on her side of the baseboard did not creak. She lay down beside me. Within 6 minutes, her breathing slowed and deepened and settled into the rhythm of sleep. I know what her sleeping breath sounds like. I have listened to it for 9 years. I lay there beside her with my eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and I let what I had just seen arrange itself in my mind the way a logistics problem arranges itself when you are working out what went wrong and what it is going to cost you. She needed the combination to my safe, and she had planned to get it without asking me, and she had done it while I was supposed to be sleeping, and she had done it quietly enough that if I had actually been asleep, I never would have known. The ceiling above me was the same ceiling it had always been. Nothing in the room had changed. The HVAC hummed. Outside, the residential street was empty and quiet the way Atlanta suburbs are at 2 in the morning. Lydia's breathing was soft, and even beside me. I was going to have to move quickly, and I was going to have to be very, very careful. If you want to hear what happened next, how I got to that safe before she could, and what I did between 3 in the morning and 5, and what she found when she finally went to use that combination, stay with me. I am going to tell you everything. Like this video if you want to hear the rest. Subscribe so you get it when it goes up. This story is not over. Not even close. The morning after the night of the photo was a Tuesday. Lydia woke at 6:30, as always. Her alarm is a soft chime that builds gradually. She set it up years ago because she hates abrupt sounds in the morning. I had been awake since the storage unit and was not startled by the chime, but I kept my eyes closed for the first 30 seconds while she reached over to silence it. She got up. She walked to the bathroom. The shower ran for 8 minutes. She came back to the room and opened the closet to dress. I watched her through my eyelashes the same way I had watched her at 2 in the morning. She opened the closet door. She reached for the shelf where she keeps her blouses. Her eyes passed over the safe in the way they always passed over it, which was to not stop on it, because she had learned to treat it as part of the architecture. But there was a fraction of a difference this morning, the briefest slowing, almost imperceptible, as her gaze moved across that shelf. A half-second of awareness that was not there on a normal morning. She dressed. She went downstairs. I got up and made the bed, which I always do since Lydia stopped making it sometime around year 5, and I came down and made coffee, which I always do because she prefers the coffee I make to the coffee she makes, and I set her cup on the counter and poured my own, and we stood in the kitchen together while the morning light came in through the window over the sink, and I thought, she photographed a combination that no longer exists for a safe that is now empty, and she is standing here in the cedar-smelling kitchen drinking coffee I made for her, and she has no idea. The thought did not make me feel good. I want to be precise about that. It did not feel like winning. It felt like standing in a room where the walls are intact, but the foundation has already shifted, and you are the only one who knows. We talked about the week ahead. She had a staff training at the dental practice on Thursday. I had a client call in the afternoon. We talked about whether we needed anything from the grocery store. We talked about the weatherman saying it might frost again on Wednesday night, and whether she needed to bring the potted rosemary in from the porch. 9 years of Tuesday mornings. I drove to my office after breakfast. My home office is in the spare room upstairs, but twice a week I go into a shared workspace in Midtown Atlanta, where I keep a desk and a filing cabinet and a phone line in a professional address. The drive is 22 minutes on a good day, and 37 on a bad one. That Tuesday it was 31. I called Marcus from the car. I told him the photographs had happened the previous night. I told him about the storage unit and what I had moved. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Good. That is consistent with what we talked about. Document it." I dictated the note while I drove into a voice memo and transcribed it at the office into my paper notebook with the date and time. Items removed from household safe on the night of March 15th at approximately 3:15 a.m. transported to storage unit, consistent with prior legal guidance regarding separation of non-marital assets. Reasons: protection of inherited property and business documentation following observed behavior suggesting imminent divorce filing. I signed and dated the note. Then I printed 3 copies. One went into the paper file in the office cabinet. One went into a sealed envelope I gave to Marcus that afternoon. One went into the storage unit in the plastic bin. The filing came 3 days later. Not 3 days, 2.5. Thursday afternoon, at 2:51, I received a call from Marcus. He said, "She filed this morning. A process server will probably be at your house this evening or tomorrow. Do not be alarmed. Do not say anything about the safe. Do not say anything about the storage unit. If Lydia asks you anything, you can say you changed the safe combination as a standard security practice, which is true, and that you will provide access as required by any legal process, which is also true. Keep everything simple. I thanked him. I went back to my client call. The client was a regional food distributor having trouble with a cold chain logistics issue in South Carolina. I solved it in 40 minutes on a whiteboard in the shared office. The problem had a clean answer once you mapped the failure point correctly. The process server found me at the house on Thursday evening. He was polite and quick. He handed me an envelope and had me sign for it and left. I stood in the doorway for a moment after he was gone, looking at the envelope, and then I went inside and set it on the kitchen table and sat down and opened it. The divorce petition listed the marital assets she was aware of: the house, the joint savings balance, both vehicles, and, in a separate line, a reference to a household safe containing property to be inventoried in discovery. I read that line twice. Then I called Marcus and read it to him over the phone. He said, "That is their play. They want the safe opened during discovery to argue that it contains undisclosed marital assets. We will respond correctly. Get some sleep." I made pasta for dinner. Lydia was not home. She had apparently already arranged to stay with her sister, which told me the filing date had not been a surprise to her, and that she had been planning the logistics of her own departure with exactly the care I would have expected. The house was quiet. I ate at the kitchen table and listened to the silence of the place, and thought about how different a quiet house feels when there is only one person in it by design. Then I washed the dishes, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. She called on a Saturday. Not her attorney's office, not a formal legal communication. Lydia herself, from her cell phone, at 9:22 in the morning when I was making eggs in the kitchen. I picked up because I had made the decision, when the filing came, that I was going to maintain a civil, normal surface with Lydia through all of this for as long as she maintained one with me. Not warmth, not the pretense of a salvageable marriage, but basic civility, the kind two adults practice across the table from each other when there is no other option that does not make everything harder. I said, "Hello." She said, "I need to get some things from the house." I said, "Of course. When would work for you?" She said she was thinking that afternoon, if I was around. I said that worked fine. I said I would be here from noon on. She arrived at 1:30. She used her key, which she still had, and came through the front door the way she always had. And I was in the living room with a book, and I looked up when she came in, and we looked at each other across the hallway, and I think that was the strangest moment of all of it. That specific look, which carried 9 years of compressed information that neither of us was going to say out loud. She said, "I just need some clothes and some documents from the filing cabinet." I said, "Take what you need." She went upstairs. I did not follow. I heard her in the bedroom, the closet. Then I heard her in the guest room, where the filing cabinet lives. She was gone for about 20 minutes. When she came back downstairs, she had a rolling carry-on and a canvas tote bag, both things she had brought with her from her sisters. She stopped in the hallway. She said, "The safe isn't opening." She said it flat, the way you state a fact when you want to see what the fact produces in another person. I said, "I changed the combination." She said, "When?" I said, "Recently, standard practice." She said, "I would like to know what is in it." I said, "So would I. There is a firearm and some documents in there. If your attorney needs an inventory in the course of discovery, Marcus will handle it through the correct process." She looked at me for a moment. Not a long moment. But there was something in her expression during that moment that I did not need explained. She had the combination on her phone, or she thought she did, and she had presumably tried it, or she had shared it with someone who had tried it, and it had not worked. And now I was standing in the hallway explaining the combination had changed, and she was looking at me with the expression of a person recalculating a plan that has just failed at a critical juncture. I looked back at her with the expression of a man who changed a combination as a standard security practice. She said, "I'll have my attorney reach out." I said, "That sounds fine." She picked up her bags and opened the front door. She walked out. I listened to her car start in the driveway. The house was quiet again. I turned that conversation over in my mind afterward, the way I turn over every important exchange, looking at every sentence from two directions, checking for things I might have said that were ambiguous or inadvertently revealing. I found nothing. The conversation had been 91 words on my end. Every word was accurate. None of it disclosed what I had done or when. The combination had changed. The contents would be addressed through the correct legal process. Both statements were completely true. Marcus called 2 days later to say that Lydia's attorney had sent a formal request for discovery related to the safe's contents. He said we would respond with a full disclosure as required. He noted, carefully, that the items in the safe at the time of the formal request were 1 registered handgun, unloaded, 1 box of ammunition, and 1 flash drive containing business backup files. Because that was all that was in the safe at the time of the formal request. Everything I had moved had been moved before the filing, before the freeze, before the formal terms of the divorce proceeding locked down what could and could not be touched. The coins were in the storage unit, where they had been for 9 days before the filing. The cash was in the storage unit. The watch was in the storage unit. The envelopes documenting the inherited status of those items, dated and signed, were in the storage unit. The safe contained a gun and a flash drive. Marcus provided that response in writing. Lydia's attorney pushed back. They had expected more. They had, presumably, been expecting to find in that safe the kind of documentation of hidden assets that would support her claim for a larger share of the marital estate. What they found, when the inventory was conducted through the proper legal process with both attorneys present, was an unloaded handgun and a backup drive. The backup drive contained, as I had told Marcus it would, business files. The business files were already accounted for in the LLC structure. There was nothing on them that advanced her case. Her attorney filed a document questioning whether assets had been transferred out of the marital estate improperly prior to the filing. Marcus responded with the documentation trail. The transfer of $15,000 from the joint account, dated weeks before the filing, properly documented and within my equitable share. The storage unit transaction, in the LLC's name, predating the filing by 3 weeks, and used for business documentation storage. The inherited items, accompanied by my grandfather's will, the probate record, and the appraiser's valuation letter, all showing clear provenance as separate inherited property received 11 years before the marriage. Her attorney had no clean response to the documentation. This is what I mean about logistics. The value is not in moving faster than the other side. The value is in doing the work before the moment arrives, so that when the moment arrives, the documentation is already done, and the positions are already solid. I had spent 3 months doing the work. I had done it carefully, legally, and completely. The night I emptied the safe was the last piece of a structure I had been building since December, not the beginning of one. The discovery process moved forward. It found exactly what it was supposed to find. The negotiation took 4 months. I am not going to make that sound faster than it was. 4 months in a contested divorce negotiation is not a long time by any standard, but it does not feel short when you are living inside it. It has its own rhythm. Bursts of legal activity, weeks of silence, then another burst. Mediation sessions that went 3 hours and produced a partial agreement on 1 out of 6 issues. Counter-proposals that arrived on Friday afternoons. My attorneys reviewing language over the weekend and responding Monday mornings. Lydia's attorney was good. I want to say that plainly because it is true. He was thorough, he was not emotional about it, and he pushed consistently on every item that had any ambiguity in its classification. That kind of attorney makes the process longer. He also makes the outcome more defensible for everyone, which I say not as a compliment, but as a fact of how legal processes work when both sides are represented by competent people. The house was the main battleground. We had paid $412,000 for the house. The market had moved significantly in 4 years. A broker estimate pegged the current value at somewhere between $580 and $620, depending on what similar properties went for in the next quarter. Call it $600,000 as a working number. Minus of what remained on the mortgage, a little over $310, you were looking at roughly $290,000 in equity. Lydia wanted 60% of that. Her argument was that she had contributed equally to the household operations and maintenance over the life of the marriage, which was true. Her attorney also argued that the down payment I had contributed should be treated as a marital asset because it came from savings accumulated during the marriage years, which was not accurate. It came from savings I had built before the marriage and from the distribution of a small investment account that had been in my name before we met. I had the documentation, the full paper trail going back 11 years, showing every dollar of that $63,000 and where it originated. Marcus presented it cleanly and completely. We settled at an equal split of the equity, $145,000 each. She took her share as a buyout, which meant I kept the house or sold it. I chose to sell, and paid her $145,000 from the proceeds. The sale happened 6 weeks after the settlement. I banked my share, paid Marcus, and closed that chapter. The business was not contested in the way I had feared. Her attorney spent 2 sessions probing the LLC structure and the retained earnings figure. Marcus's responses to both were what they had always been. The business was a sole member LLC established before the marriage. The retained earnings were corporate assets not subject to division, and the marital component of the business, if any, was Ferdinand's salary draw, which had already been disclosed on every joint tax return we had filed. The salary draw was already accounted for in the house equity calculation. They eventually moved on from the business. The inherited items were the cleanest part of the whole process. The will, the probate record, the appraiser's letter, that documentation was airtight. Her attorney raised the inheritance question once in a written filing, and Marcus responded with the complete provenance package. The items were not mentioned again. The cash was addressed as my share of the joint savings, previously documented and transferred before the filing. Accounted for. By July, we had a complete settlement agreement. The mediator signed off. Both attorneys signed off. We appeared before the judge via a brief hearing, standard procedure, and the divorce was finalized. I remember the moment the hearing ended. It is not dramatic if you have been through it. The judge says what the judge says, and the clerk records the record, and that is the end of a legal status that has existed for 9 years. It takes less than 8 minutes. Lydia and I did not speak in the hallway outside the courtroom. We were not hostile. We were simply 2 people who had correctly understood that we had nothing left to say to each other. She walked one way with her attorney. I walked the other way with Marcus. Marcus took me to lunch afterward, a place near the courthouse that he has been going to since law school. He ordered a club sandwich without looking at the menu, and I ordered the same, and we ate, and he told me about a case he was starting work on for another client, and I listened and talked about something that was not the past 9 months. And when we were done and walking back to the parking deck, he stopped on the sidewalk and turned to me and said, "You did this exactly right. It is not a compliment I needed to hear, but it was good to hear it." I thanked him. I drove home. The house sold in August. I had lived there alone from March through the sale. 5 months in a 3-bedroom house by myself, which is one of the stranger experiences I can recommend to anyone who wants to really understand what a marriage is versus what a marriage looks like from the outside. Because it is surprisingly quiet. Not just the absence of sound, but the absence of a second center of gravity. The particular way a house rearranges itself when the person who ordered things a specific way is no longer there to keep them that way. I rearranged the furniture in the living room after Lydia left. I did not plan to. I walked in one afternoon and found myself looking at the arrangement we had settled into years ago, a setup that always felt slightly wrong to me, angled toward the television in a way that made the room feel narrow. And I moved everything. It took 40 minutes. When I was done, the room felt larger. It had always been that size. The layout had just been compressing it. I thought about that for a while afterward, about how many things in the house I had adapted to without examining. The cedar drawer liners I had liked initially, and then stopped noticing, and then, during the months of watching everything carefully, began to associate so precisely with what was happening that I could no longer smell cedar without a tightening in my chest. The temperature Lydia kept the house at. She ran warm, and I run cold, so we kept the thermostat at 68, which was 2 degrees warmer than I would have chosen. The specific cabinet where the coffee mugs went, which was a right cabinet when my instinct was always a left one. Small things, small adaptations. The kind you make so gradually in a shared life that you stop recognizing them as adaptations and start thinking of them as just how things are. I lowered the thermostat to 66 the week she left. I want to tell you about the coin appraiser, because there is a detail from that appointment that I did not hold on to at the time, and which came back to me during those 5 months in the house, when the appraiser went through the 14 coins, one at a time. He would turn each one in his fingers briefly before putting it under the loupe. Just a rotation, front, back, edge, front. He explained at one point that this was partly habitual and partly functional. The edge of a coin tells you things the face does not, about wear patterns and previous handling, and whether the metal has been stressed. You can learn a significant amount about a coin's history by looking at the part nobody photographs. I thought about that a great deal during those 5 months. A marriage is not different, really. The face of a thing, the dinners, the morning routines, the vacations, the anniversaries, is the part that gets photographed and displayed and recalled at the end. What lives along the edge is the accumulation of small decisions. When you adapted, when you stopped adapting, when you began choosing convenience over honesty, when the gap between what was real and what you were presenting to yourself and the other person became large enough to drive a truck through. I do not think Lydia is a bad person. I thought about this a lot, and I keep coming back to that conclusion. A strategic person, absolutely. A person who had decided what she wanted and moved methodically toward it without much concern for what the other party might experience in the process. Yes. But bad is a category I have trouble applying to people I knew with any depth. She had reasons for the things she did that made sense inside her own structure. I just was not inside that structure, and did not know it as fully as I thought. What I know is that I was not blameless in the shape of the marriage. I chose, for a number of years, not to ask the questions whose answers would have been uncomfortable. I filed away observations, the Christmas envelope she pocketed without acknowledging, the cold distances she maintained around certain conversations, under topics I had decided not to push. I told myself this was deference. Looking back, it was avoidance. Two organized people who are both good at structuring away discomfort can build a very functional-looking life on a foundation that neither of them has examined closely. We both built it. She just decided to take her share and leave more efficiently than I had expected. I sold the house in August for $608,000. After the mortgage balance and closing costs, the net to both parties was approximately $287,000. Lydia received her $143.5. I received mine. I kept Marcus's firm's fee out of my share and deposited the remainder into the personal account I had opened in February. Then I found an apartment in Midtown Atlanta, which I had signed a lease on while the house was in escrow, and I moved in with 2 borrowed folding chairs, a shipping box of kitchen essentials, and the duffel bag that had spent 4 months in the storage unit. The first thing I unpacked, on the first evening, was my grandfather's pocket watch. I set it on the windowsill. The second thing I did was drive back to the storage unit and take the coin case. I brought it to the apartment. I set it on the shelf in the bedroom closet. Then I went and bought a new safe. The new safe is identical to the old one. Same manufacturer, same size, same mechanical spin dial mechanism. I ordered it specifically and waited 3 days for it to arrive rather than buying the first available alternative. I am aware that this borders on stubbornness. I stand by it. I had a safe that worked. The safe was not the problem. I installed it in the bedroom closet of the apartment on a Saturday morning with 2 lag bolts through the shelf and into the wall stud behind it. It sits exactly where I want it. Upper shelf, right side. When I closed the closet door, you would not know it was there unless you opened the door and looked. Before I put anything inside it, I set the combination. This is the part I want to tell you about carefully, because it matters more than the rest. I stood in the closet with the dial in my hands, and I thought for a long time about the number. The old combination had been personal. It meant something specific to me, a date from my family that I thought about once a year, and which no one else would think to guess. I had reset it the night I emptied the safe, in a hurry, to a random number I would not forget. The new combination needed to be something deliberate. I thought about my grandfather. He bought those coins over 40 years. He bought them on the years when there was something left over after the bills and the savings and the children's needs, when the balance in the account was a little higher than expected, and he could afford to add one more piece of real gold to the collection he was building the slow, old way. He did not have a strategy for them beyond a belief that gold kept its value and that the wealth should stay in the family. He had a philosophy that I am summarizing as, own what is real, protect what is yours, and do not let anyone tell you what you have is worth less than it is. I set the new combination. I put the coins inside, the watch in its leather case, the flash drive, now updated to include the complete record of everything that had happened since December. Every document, every dated memo, every attorney communication, the appraiser's letter, the coin valuation. A complete record, in case it is ever needed, of exactly how carefully everything had been handled. I closed the safe. I turned the dial past the markers. I heard the latch engage. Then I stood in the closet of my apartment, alone, in the quiet that is different from the quiet of a house with someone else in it, and I felt something I am going to describe as accurately as I can, which means I am not going to call it a victory, because it did not feel like winning something. It felt more like returning to a baseline, like going back to the version of yourself that existed before something else was layered over it. I felt like Ferdinand again. Not Ferdinand the husband. Not Ferdinand who adapted the thermostat and filed away the things he noticed and told himself it was probably nothing, and lay awake in the dark watching his wife photograph the combination to a safe she never should have needed to access. Ferdinand before all of that. The man who built a business from 4 clients and a laptop. The man who keeps a paper notebook with exact numbers in it. The man whose grandmother taught him that the weight of something you can hold in your hand is worth more than a number on a screen. I closed the closet door. I made coffee. I stood at the window with the cup and looked at the parking deck across the street, which is not the most beautiful view I have ever had, but is mine. and I thought about what comes next. The answer, it turned out, was not complicated. Same work I had always done. Same methodical approach. A little more room in the apartment than I strictly needed, because I signed for 2 bedrooms on the theory that the second room would make a better office than any corner of the living room. The business was doing well. 2 new clients in the spring, both of them referrals from existing clients, which is the only kind of growth I trust because it comes from doing the work correctly. I ran a 10-kilometer race on a Saturday in September. I had not run a race in 5 years. My time was slower than it had been and better than I had expected, and I ate a large breakfast afterward and drove to the storage facility and officially closed the unit I no longer needed and turned in the key card and drove home. Simple things. The combination lock on the new safe is a number other than someone else chose. It belongs to no previous context. It will mean something eventually. These numbers accumulate meaning once they become habit. But for now, it is simply mine. That is enough. I want to tell you something about logistics that I do not tell clients. The best thing in logistics is not efficiency. Efficiency is a side effect. The best thing is clarity, the ability to see a system as it actually is, without the comfortable softening that comes from wanting it to be better than it is. Clarity is uncomfortable because it requires you to include all the information, not just the information that confirms the plan you were hoping would work. I spent a lot of time, during the marriage and before the filing, and in the months after, going back through the systems I had failed to see clearly. Not as punishment, as an accounting. I had been not clear about Lydia for several years before the divorce. Not blind. I am not a person who is easily blind. But I had practiced a kind of selective focus that excluded the things that would have been harder to address. The smoothed away financial inquiries. The cool season after I said no about the car loan. The gift envelope she pocketed. These were data points that I categorized as noise because treating them as signal would have required me to take action. Taking action is expensive. It costs relationship capital. It costs the peace of a shared life. It costs the story you have been telling yourself about who you are married to. I chose, consistently, not to pay those costs. I am not sure that choice was wrong, exactly. I am not certain that confronting every data point early would have produced a better outcome. It might have produced a different one, and different is not the same as better. What I do know is that the habit of not seeing that I practiced for several years left me in a position where, when I finally needed to see clearly, I had to do it very quickly and under significant pressure. I managed that, but I managed it partly because I had the skills for it, and partly because I got lucky in a few specific details. The flat open browser tab, the unlocked phone screen, the one evening she left her laptop facing the wrong direction. A less observant person would not have caught those things. A less prepared person would not have had a storage unit already rented, an attorney already consulted, a personal account already open. I had all of those things not because I was clever, but because I was trained, by profession and by upbringing, to prepare for conditions before they arrive. Most people are not trained that way. Most people meet the crisis and then decide what to do. The window for action is much narrower from that position. I am telling you this because I want to be honest about what I did and did not earn. I protected what I protected because I acted before the moment of crisis. I acted before the moment of crisis because I recognized the warning signs. I recognized the warning signs because I had spent years being paid to read systems for exactly the kind of slow drift that eventually becomes a failure. My grandfather's coins are on the shelf in my apartment closet because I had a storage unit key in my wallet when I needed it. That is not a spiritual victory. It is a logistics outcome. I am grateful for it either way. What I am more uncertain about is what I lost that was not a logistics problem. 9 years is a long time. I do not think the entirety of them was built on sand. I think a significant portion of the first 5 years was real. Real in the sense that the two of us were genuinely building something, in the genuine belief that we were moving in the same direction. The divergence happened over time, and it happened in a way that she understood before I did, which is a strange thing to sit with. She knew it was over before she let on. She spent months planning the legal architecture of the exit while I was still making her coffee in the morning. There is something specific that is strange about that knowledge, and I want to name it clearly because I think it is one of the more disorienting parts of this kind of betrayal. It is not just that she planned to take what she could. It is that the marriage continued. The routines, the conversations, the Tuesday mornings in the kitchen, while she was planning it. Every cup of coffee was made inside a context that only she knew the full shape of. I was operating with an incomplete picture in a situation where the other party had the complete one. That inversion of information is what I have found hardest to let go of. Not the money, not the legal process. The knowledge that there was a period, months maybe, during which I was fully present in a marriage that one of us had already decided was over. I do not carry anger about it the way some people do. I have found that anger takes up storage space better used for other things. I carry it as a lesson about the cost of not seeing, which is different from anger because it implies I have some agency in the next time. There will not be a next time that is identical to this one. The details are always different. But the underlying pattern, the slow drift, the selective focus, the data points filed away rather than examined, that pattern is repeatable if I allow it to be. I do not intend to allow it. I am talking to you from the apartment. It is November now. 8 months since the night I lay awake watching Lydia photograph the combination dial. 5 months since the settlement. 3 months since I moved in here. The apartment still smells like new wood flooring and the specific neutral smell of a place that has not yet taken on the smell of whoever lives in it, which is a thing I notice and find, against my expectations, somewhat satisfying. My grandfather's watch is on the windowsill, where I set it the first evening. The Redline Logistics business has 10 clients now. I added the 2 spring referrals, and then, in October, 2 more. One from a regional pharmacy chain having distribution problems, and one from a fruit importer who found me through the pharmacy chain's recommendation. $14,000 a month has become $22,000. The retained earnings account, which Lydia was planning to use as leverage, and which is now simply here, growing, doing what a retained earnings account should do, is approaching $120,000. I still plan to expand into a second city next spring. The plan is now actually happening instead of being a future intention. I think about the night of the photo sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. Usually late. The way things come back to you late, when the day is over, and there is nothing louder to occupy the mind. I will be at the desk finishing a client project, or standing at the kitchen window with a glass of water, and I will go back to that bedroom in the dark. The HVAC hum, the blue-white glow of a phone screen pointed at a safe combination. What I feel when I go back there is not complicated. I feel clear. Not vindicated. That is too dramatic a word for what actually happened, which was fundamentally just a man doing careful work before a difficult situation arrived, so that when it arrived, he was standing on solid ground. Not relieved exactly, though some relief is in there. What I feel is the satisfying cool of a system that worked the way it was designed to work, which is, if you ask me, as good as it gets. The safe is in the closet. The combination is mine. I reset it last week for no reason, except that it had been a few months, and it is a practice I believe in. 48 minutes, I had told myself. Longer to the right this time, shorter to the left, the same ending number that I chose for reasons I will keep to myself. I turned the dial to the markers by feel, the way I have always done it, the way my hands know without asking my head. I felt the latch release. I opened it. Everything inside is exactly where I put it. The coins, the watch case, the flash drive, current as of last Tuesday, the documentation file. I closed it again. I reset it. The dial spun to the resting position. The closet door is shut. I want to say 2 things before I finish. The first is this. If you are in a situation that feels like what I described, the slow cold, the pointed questions, the data points you are filing away rather than examining, I am not telling you to panic, and I am not telling you to act without a clear picture of what you are dealing with. I am telling you to stop not seeing. Whatever it is that you have been choosing not to look at directly, look at it. Get documentation. Get an attorney. Get a clear picture of what is actually in the room before anyone else gets to define it for you. The window for acting before a crisis is always wider than the window for acting inside one. Use the wider window. The second thing is simpler. My grandfather bought those coins slowly, 1 or 2 at a time, on the years when there was something left over. He kept them in their original case because he understood that provenance matters, that the story of where a thing came from is part of what gives it value. He left them to me by name because he wanted them to stay in the family. He did not specify what family meant exactly, because I think he trusted me to understand that the family worth protecting is the one that actually shows up, actually does the work, actually treats what was given to them with the respect it was given in. The coins are in the safe. The safe is locked. The combination is mine. If this story reached something in you, if you have been in a situation like this, or you know someone who has, or you just needed to hear that it is possible to come through something like this with what matters most still intact, please leave a comment. Tell me what hit you. Tell me what you are carrying. I read those comments and I want to know. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel so you get the next story when it goes up. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who is in that quiet house, looking at the data points, trying to decide whether to see or keep not seeing, share this with them. It might be the most useful thing they hear this week. Take care of what is yours. Let me back up, because none of what happened that night makes sense without the 9 years before it. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. My father worked maintenance at the Fort Benning commissary for 22 years. My mother ran the household and kept meticulous records of every dollar that moved through the family, every grocery receipt, every utility bill, every annual comparison of what things cost this year against last year. She did it in a spiral notebook at the kitchen table every Sunday evening while the rest of us watched television in the other room. I grew up thinking that was ordinary. I grew up thinking that everyone's family had a notebook. That upbringing shaped the way I think about things. I track cost structures by habit. I map systems instinctively. I spent 1 tour in the Army after high school, then went to a state school on the GI Bill, graduated with a degree in supply chain management, and spent the first 9 years of my career working for a regional distribution company out of Atlanta. In my 29th year, I left to start Redline Logistics Consulting. Just me, a laptop, a phone, and a list of 4 clients who said they would follow me if I went independent. 2 of them actually did. That was enough to build from. By the time I married Lydia, I was 31, and the business was pulling its first real revenue. Not comfortable money, but honest money. Money I had made by solving problems for people who paid me to think carefully. Lydia was 33. She managed the administrative operation for a group dental practice in Buckhead, scheduling, billing, staff coordination, a job that required exactly the kind of organized, forward-planning mind she had. She was precise. She was quick. She had a specific way of entering a room where she had already mapped the exits before she sat down. I admired that. I thought I understood it because I recognized it. I thought we were built the same way. We married in October, 11 months after we met. The house in Marietta came 2 years after that. 3 bedrooms, a 2-car garage, a backyard that sold us the first time we walked it. I handled the down payment out of savings I had been building since my Army days. It came to $63,000. We put both names on the mortgage because that was the right and normal thing to do, and because I trusted her. For the first 5 years, the marriage was solid. Not perfect. No marriage is perfect. But we did not fight about real things. We were 2 organized people building something together, and we knew how to divide the work and not step on each other doing it. She handled the household budget, and I handled the business. We put money into a joint account for shared expenses, and each kept a personal account for individual spending. It was clean and functional, and I felt, for a long time, that we had figured out something that most couples had not. The cracks started about 8 months before the night I lay awake watching her photograph my safe. They started the way cracks usually start in a structure. Not dramatically, not with a bang, but as a slow change in behavior that you almost dismiss, because it is easier to dismiss it than to admit what it might mean. The first thing I noticed was the questions about money. She had always known the general shape of our finances. But there began to be a different kind of question. Detailed, specific, pointed. What were the business accounts earning month over month? Had I thought about restructuring the company? Did the LLC hold much in retained earnings? Did I know what the current valuation of the business might be if we ever sold? Questions that sounded, on the surface, like interest. Questions that felt, if I am being honest, more like inventory. I answered them. I was not guarded then, not yet. But afterward, sitting alone with a cup of coffee while she was in another room, I would turn them over in my mind the way my mother used to turn over a utility bill, looking at the number and asking, "What is this really telling me?" I told myself it was probably nothing. I told myself the same thing 3 or 4 more times over the following 2 months. I am a logistics man. I believe in pattern recognition. And I can tell you the exact moment the pattern stopped being something I could dismiss. It was a Thursday in December, about 3 months before the night of the photo. We shared a computer in the spare room, a desktop we used for household stuff, printing boarding passes, filing taxes, that kind of thing. I went in after dinner to print a vendor invoice and the browser was open. Not to any particular program, just to the Google Chrome history, which showed, at the top, a tab that had been visited that afternoon. The title of the page was, "What to Know Before Filing for Divorce in Georgia, FAQ." I stood at the desk for a moment. I looked at the screen. I looked at the timestamp. 4:17 in the afternoon, which was when Lydia had said she was working from home that day, a meeting-free Thursday that she sometimes took at the house. I did not say anything. I closed the browser tab. I printed the invoice. I went back downstairs, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I ate the dinner she had cooked. Baked chicken, asparagus, the meal she made when she was in a settled mood. And I watched her across the table, and I did not say a single word about what I had seen. I want to be precise about why I made that choice. It was not avoidance. It was not denial. It was strategy. The same instinct that makes you not react in a negotiation when the other side reveals something they did not mean to. If Lydia was researching divorce, she was at a stage in her thinking that she was not ready to share with me. That meant her plans were not yet fixed. That meant I had time to understand what I was dealing with before she moved. The worst thing I could do was let her know that I knew, because the moment she knew that I knew, her timeline would compress. So I looked at her, and I asked how her day had been, and she said fine, a little slow, and I said mine too. That night I started paying attention differently, not obsessively, not paranoid surveillance, but a calibrated awareness, the kind you develop after years of monitoring supply chains for anomalies. You do not track everything. That is too much noise. You identify the pressure points, the variables that carry the most weight, and you monitor those. Everything else you let pass. The pressure points in a potential divorce with an organized and financially aware spouse are the information points. Who knows what and when? I thought about what Lydia had access to and what she was likely trying to build a picture of. She had access to the joint account. She had access to the mortgage and the property tax records. She had seen our tax returns because we filed jointly. She knew the business existed and that it was earning. What she did not have clear visibility into was the internal structure of the LLC, the retained earnings, or the distribution schedule I had been running for the past 2 years. My business had grown, quietly and steadily, the way good logistics businesses grow, by solving problems correctly and not making noise. By December of that year, Redline was billing about $14,000 a month across 8 clients. After expenses and my own salary draw, there was a retained earnings account inside the LLC that I had not been drawing down, because I was planning to expand into a second city the following spring. That account held a little over $92,000. Lydia had never asked about retained earnings specifically, but she had been asking about valuation. And I had recently, very recently, just a few weeks before the browser tab incident, heard her use the word in casual conversation, the way a person uses a word they have recently encountered and not yet fully integrated. She said at dinner one evening that she read an article about how difficult it was to value small businesses in divorce proceedings. She said it as an observation, as a general statement of interest. She was not a woman who made general observations. I started keeping a separate notebook, not on any device. A spiral notebook, the same brand my mother used, because some habits are inherited in ways that only reveal themselves when you need them. I started writing down dates, observations, the specific questions she asked about money, and when she asked them. I started paying attention to when she was on her phone in a different room, which happened more often than it used to. And I started thinking about the safe. There are things a person leaves in their eye line that they do not mean to leave there. Not because they are careless, because they are human, and humans can only track so many things at once. And when you are planning something large and complicated, the small things sometimes slip through. Lydia was thorough, but she made 3 small mistakes over 6 weeks, and I found all 3 of them. The first was the phone. She left it on the kitchen counter one Saturday morning when she went to take a shower. I was standing at the stove making eggs, and it was face up and unlocked. She had just been using it. I did not pick it up. I had no intention of going through her messages. But the screen was visible, and the thumbnail grid of her camera roll was on it, and I can read a page in less than 3 seconds, which is a skill some people find alarming in everyday life, and which served me extremely well standing at that stove. The thumbnails were mostly the same size and the same type, but in the middle of them I could see several that had a different quality. Documents, white backgrounds, text-heavy, the unmistakable format of a financial statement. 2 of them had the distinct layout of a bank summary page. One of them, at the edge of the grid, showed what appeared to be a table with dollar amounts and dates. I flipped the eggs. She came back from the shower 6 minutes later. I handed her a cup of coffee and said nothing. But I knew what she was building. She was constructing a portfolio of our financial exposure, photographing every statement she could access. The joint account, possibly the mortgage statements, whatever came through the mail that she picked up before I did. She was doing what any careful person planning a legal action does. She was building a file. The second mistake was the laptop. She worked from home on Tuesdays. I was in my home office, which is on the other side of the house, and I came out to get a glass of water. Her laptop was on the kitchen table, open, and her screensaver had not kicked in yet. She was in the bathroom, which I could tell because I heard the water running. On the screen was a document, not a web page, an actual word processing document, a list. I read it in the time it took me to cross the kitchen and come back with a glass of water. It was a list of assets, formatted neatly, the way Lydia formatted everything. Category, description, estimated value. The house, with what she had looked up as the current market estimate. The joint savings account, with the current balance. The vehicles, both of them, with what she had estimated as their trade-in value. Her own retirement account. My salary draw from the business for the past 2 years, which she had pulled from the tax returns. The LLC retained earnings were not on the list. The business valuation was listed as a question mark with a note in parentheses that said, "Need documentation." I reached the other side of the kitchen. I filled my glass. I walked back to my office without speaking. I sat down at my desk and I looked at the wall for a long, careful minute. She had done a good job with that list. She had most of it. But the part she was missing, the part she was planning to chase through discovery in a divorce proceeding, was the piece that mattered most. And the note said, "Need documentation," which told me she had not found it yet. She was planning to get it either through legal disclosure or through whatever she could gather before filing. The third thing was the conversation. We were watching television one evening in January, 2 months before the night of the photo, and she asked me, casually, not looking away from the screen, whether I had ever thought about what would happen to the business if something happened to me, like a health crisis, or if I ever wanted to step back from it, what the exit structure looked like. I said I had thought about it some. I said the business had a basic succession plan drafted. She said, "Does that plan include a buyout structure? Like if a co-owner had to be bought out?" I said there were no co-owners. It was a sole member LLC. She said, "Of course, right." And she went back to watching television. I went back to watching television too. But I turned that question over for the rest of the evening. She was probing the structure. She was trying to understand what a court could reach. She was working from a misunderstanding. She seemed to believe that an LLC, in which a spouse had invested marital time and effort, might be reachable as a marital asset. In some cases, she would be right. In the specific structure of mine, which I had set up with careful legal guidance from the beginning, she was less right than she knew. I drove into the city the following morning and sat down with Marcus Tate, who has been my attorney since I formed the company, and who played golf with me in college, and who I trust more than almost anyone alive. I told him I needed to talk about divorce. He put his phone face down on the desk and did not interrupt me for 20 minutes. When I was done, he said, "When did this start?" I said, "I am not sure it has started, but I think it is going to." He said, "Good, because there is quite a bit we can do right now that we will not be able to do once she files." Marcus gave me a yellow legal pad and told me to write down every asset I could think of, business and personal, with my best estimate of its source: premarital savings, marital contribution, inherited, gifted, or mixed. Then he took the pad and went through it line by line the way a doctor reads a chart, methodically, without drama, pausing occasionally to write a note in the margin. When he was done, he looked up and said, "Here is what I can protect, here is what I cannot, and here is what we need to move on immediately." In Georgia, assets that are clearly separate property, brought into the marriage, inherited, or explicitly kept separate, are generally not subject to equitable division in a divorce. The operative word is generally. Courts have some discretion. The structure matters. Documentation matters more. He told me that the retained earnings inside the LLC were already well protected by the business structure I had set up. Because I had never commingled those funds with joint accounts, because I had maintained clean books from the beginning, because the LLC had its own tax filings and its own operating account that Lydia had never been on. Those funds were legally the LLC's assets, not personal marital assets, and a court would have difficulty reaching them in a way that favored her. He did note one area of exposure: the joint savings account. We had been depositing a portion of my salary draw into the joint account every month, which Lydia and I then used for household expenses. But there was a balance sitting in that account, a little over $31,000 at the time, that had accumulated because expenses had been lower than budgeted for the past year. That balance was clearly marital property. If she filed, both parties would typically be restrained from moving marital funds. I could not legally drain the joint account after a filing. But before a filing, I could. As long as I documented what I took and why, and did not exceed my equitable share, and kept a record of using it for legitimate purposes. Marcus said, "What I would advise is that you move your half of that joint balance, call it $15,000, into a separate personal account, in your name only, immediately. Not secretly, transparently. Create a paper trail. Date it. Note the reason. Your reason is that you are separating your personal finances in anticipation of a possible change in marital status. That is a legitimate reason. Courts see it regularly. The important thing is that you do not move more than your share, and that you document every dollar." I drove to the bank that afternoon. The woman at the teller window had worked at that branch for the 3 years since Lydia and I had opened the joint account. She greeted me the way she always greeted me, by name. I told her I wanted to open a new individual account and transfer $15,000 from the joint savings into it. She pulled up the account. The balance was $32,400. She said she could do that, no problem. I asked her to document the transfer to the new account with today's date and my name as the sole account holder. She did all of it without asking why. The new account had a debit card only in my name. I filed the account number and routing number in a folder marked Operating, Ferdy in my home office filing cabinet in the back, behind the household utility records. I told Marcus the transfer was done. He noted it on his copies. Then we talked about the inherited property. My grandfather died when I was 19, 8 years before I married Lydia. He left me 2 things: a gold pocket watch that had belonged to his own father, which I have kept in its original leather case, and a set of gold coins, 14 American double eagles, pre-1933, each worth considerably more than face value, that he had been collecting since the 1960s. I had never discussed the coins with Lydia in any financial detail. She knew they existed. I do not think she had any real sense of their value. Under Georgia law, inherited property belongs to the spouse who inherited it, as long as it has not been commingled or contributed to the marital estate in some clear way. My grandfather left those coins to me by name in his will, 11 years before I was married. They had never been in a joint account. They had never been retitled. They had sat, in their original case, inside my safe since I came to Atlanta. They were mine. Marcus said we should document the provenance clearly. A copy of the will, a copy of the probate record from my grandfather's estate, and an independent valuation of the coin's current market value. He had an appraiser he used for exactly this situation. I brought the coins to the appraiser's office the following week. The appraiser sat across his desk from me with a loupe and a price guide, and he went through each coin with the particular absorption of a man who loves something exactly as much as his work requires. When he was done, he produced a written valuation. The 14 coins had an estimated current market value of $68,000. I took the valuation letter. I thanked him. I walked out to my truck in the parking lot and sat there for a moment in the February cold, looking at the number on the page. $68,000 in gold coins that my grandfather saved across 40 years of his working life, sitting in a safe in my bedroom closet, and my wife 2 miles away at home, quietly photographing financial documents on her phone, planning to make a claim on whatever she could reach. I thought about my grandfather. He had worked at a textile mill for most of his adult life. He bought those coins 1 or 2 at a time, on years when there was something left over at Christmas, because he believed that gold kept its value in ways that paper did not. He was a quiet, methodical man who thought in generations. He wanted the wealth to stay in the family. I put the valuation letter in my folder. I drove home. The 2 weeks after I met with Marcus were the strangest 2 weeks of my marriage. I was living 2 lives in the same house. In the first life, I was Ferdinand, husband. I cooked dinner on the nights I always cooked dinner. I took out the garbage. I watched television with Lydia in the evenings and asked about her day and listened to the answers. I did not behave differently in any way I could detect. I did not pick fights. I did not go cold. I did not look at her sideways or study her when she was not watching, or do any of the things that a person does when they are building a case against someone else in their head. I was, to all visible appearances, exactly the husband I had been the month before. In the second life, I was working. Marcus had given me a list. Not a written list, he was too careful for that, but a verbal sequence of things I needed to do, in what order and within what time frame, before a divorce filing could freeze accounts, trigger automatic restraining orders on asset transfers, or kick off a discovery process that would require full disclosure of everything I had moved. I had approximately 60 to 90 days from the moment she decided to file to the moment those restrictions would take effect, and I was somewhere inside that window without knowing exactly where. The first thing on the list was the retained earnings. Marcus had already reviewed the LLC operating agreement and confirmed that the structure was clean. What he wanted me to do was ensure that the documentation was ironclad and current. Updated minutes of the LLC, a current operating agreement reflecting my role as sole member, and a clean separation between personal and business expenses in the books. I spent 4 evenings in the home office going through 2 years of bookkeeping records and cross-referencing them against the bank statements. Every dollar that had come into the LLC account and every dollar that had left was documented. There was no commingling. There never had been, because I am my mother's son, and my mother did not leave numbers unexplained. The second thing was the joint account. I had already done the transfer, which Marcus approved, but he wanted me to keep the personal account active and funded going forward so that the transfer would look like the beginning of a normal separation of finances, not a one-time unusual action. I moved the next 2 salary draws entirely into the personal account, with a note in my records. Adjusting personal draw allocation in anticipation of financial restructuring. Normal language, the kind of thing that makes sense in context. The third thing was the safe. Marcus did not specifically tell me what to do about the safe. He did not know about the safe in the way I knew about it, but he had said during our first meeting that inherited assets and personal documents should be kept in a secure location where they were not subject to unilateral access by the other party. He had said this the way lawyers say things that have specific legal weight without over-explaining. I understood him. I had been thinking about the safe for 3 weeks by then. Not obsessively, but the way you think about a pressure point in a distribution network, occasionally, always with the underlying question, what happens to this if things go wrong? The safe held the following: 1 registered handgun, unloaded, with ammunition in a separate case. A flash drive containing my business backup files, updated monthly. $11,000 in cash in mixed 50s and hundreds. I had been building this as an operational reserve for the business, the kind of cash that sometimes needs to move faster than a bank transfer, my grandfather's pocket watch in its leather case, the 14 gold coins in their original case, and 3 envelopes, one with the original LLC incorporation filings, one with my grandfather's will and the probate record, and one with the coin appraisal letter Marcus had arranged. Lydia had never asked to see inside the safe. She had accepted the original explanation, firearm paperwork, old documents, and not pushed further. I had kept the combination entirely to myself. Not out of suspicion at the time, just habit. There are things a person keeps private not because they distrust their spouse, but because privacy itself is not inherently suspicious, and I had always been the kind of man who kept certain things in a room of their own. The flash drive was the piece that mattered most in a practical sense. Those files included not just business backups, but my copy of every document Marcus and I had been working through. The LLC minutes, the updated operating agreement, the valuation letter, a copy of the grandfather's will, and a memo I had drafted for myself, dated and signed, summarizing the sequence of conversations and decisions I had made since December. That flash drive needed to not be in a location where Lydia could tell a judge it was accessible to both parties during the marriage. I had been thinking about a storage unit. The week before the night of the photo, I drove to a self-storage facility about 4 miles from the house. I paid in cash for a 5x5 climate-controlled unit, using my business name and a billing address connected to my LLC's registered agent address, not the house. The attendant handed me a key card and a lock, and did not ask for anything beyond the paperwork and the cash. I put nothing in the unit that day. I just wanted the unit to exist. I wanted the option to be already in place, because in a situation like this, the time between the decision and the action matters enormously, and I did not want to be making decisions under pressure. I want to be clear about something. I did not leave that unit empty because I was waiting for something dramatic. I left it empty because I was hoping things might not go as far as I feared. I left it empty because some part of me was still married to this woman, and walking in through the front door every evening and making dinner and asking about her day. I left it empty because hope is its own kind of logistics failure. It keeps you from moving faster than the situation requires. The night she photographed my safe was the night that hope officially ran out of road. I want to tell you about the safe. Not just what was in it, although I will get to that. I want to tell you about the safe as an object, because objects carry the weight of decisions, and this one carries quite a bit. I bought it 4 years into the marriage, when I got the handgun. Lydia did not want a gun in the house. That was her prerogative, and I understood it. And the agreement we reached was that if I was going to keep one in the house, it would be in a locked safe at all times, not accessible to anyone who happened to be in the bedroom. I agreed completely. I have no interest in a gun being accessible to anyone who is not me, and I was buying the safe anyway. The gun was almost incidental. I chose a mechanical combination safe because I am, as I mentioned, the son of a woman who kept careful records with a ballpoint pen in a paper notebook. Electronic safes have batteries, and batteries die at inconvenient moments, and they have codes that can be recovered by manufacturers through back-end access, which is not a risk relevant to most people, but is a risk I am aware of, and awareness is enough for me to prefer the alternative. The mechanical spin dial combination requires 3 numbers, hit in sequence with the correct direction changes. If you know the combination, it opens in about 8 seconds. If you do not know the combination, you need a professional with specific tools or a significant amount of time. The combination I chose was not complex by any standard except mine. It meant something to me personally, a number connected to a date I thought about once a year and which no one else would think to guess. I had never written it down. I had never told it to anyone, including Lydia. When she photographed the dial in the dark at 12 minutes past 2 in the morning, she was photographing the combination as I had left it, which is to say she was photographing a dial sitting at rest with the indicator at its default resting position. That would not give her the combination itself. But it would give an expert, a safecracker, a locksmith, or someone experienced in reading spin dial resting positions, a starting point. I thought about that as I lay in the dark beside her cooling breath sleep, and I realized she was not planning to open the safe herself. She was planning to show those photographs to someone who could help her open it, or who could help her make a legal argument that the contents were marital property that she had been denied access to. That second possibility was the one that concerned me most. If a divorce filing included a claim that I had been concealing assets inside a safe in the marital home that she had no access to, a court might order the safe opened, its contents inventoried, and a determination made about what was and was not marital property. That process would be messy, time-consuming, and would put my grandfather's property into the middle of a legal dispute where the outcome was less certain than I wanted it to be. There is a cleaner option. The safe is empty. If the safe is empty, there is nothing to dispute. I had been circling this conclusion for 3 weeks, the way you circle a highway merge when traffic is uncertain. I was waiting for the right moment to accelerate. She gave it to me. The other thing about the safe, the thing I want you to understand because it matters to what happened that night, is this. I had opened it so many times in 4 years that my hands knew the sequence without my eyes. 42 to the left, 17 to the right, 9 to the left, then pull. I could do it in the dark. I had done it in the dark more than once, coming home late when Lydia was already asleep, and not wanting to turn on the closet light and wake her. I am not a dramatic man, but I can tell you that this small, ordinary piece of muscle memory, the kind that builds up from hundreds of repetitions until it lives in your hands instead of your head, was the single most useful thing I had on my side when I needed to move without making a sound. At 3:17 in the morning, I used it. Let me tell you exactly how that night went. When Lydia's breathing settled back into sleep, I lay still for a while longer. Long enough that I was certain. Her breathing in sleep has a specific depth, a specific rhythm you do not fake the way I had been faking mine for 3 weeks. Genuine sleep sounds different from rest. The jaw softens. There is a particular quality to the exhale. I know her sleep because I have been beside it for 9 years. I waited until I was certain. I checked my watch by the faint glow from the streetlight through the blinds. It was 3:02. I moved. Not fast. Never fast. Fast makes noise. I separated myself from the sheet with the particular unhurrying slowness of a man who has been still for so long that movement feels like it belongs to someone else. I sat up. I let my feet find the floor. She sleeps toward the center of the bed, which meant the baseboard strip on her side was not a factor for me. My side of the room is clear to the closet. 8 steps. I know because I counted them a year ago for no reason I understood at the time. The closet door was already open by the inch or two she had slid it to when she came in. I widened it by the same amount, not further, keeping the movement within the range she had already disturbed. The HVAC hum helped. It does not mask sound exactly, but it raises the baseline noise of the room enough that small sounds dissolve into it. I reached for the safe by feel. Upper shelf, right side, its back corners flush with the shelf edge. My left hand found it. The dial was under my right hand. The familiar cold of the metal, slightly rough where the numbers are embossed. The small raised dot at 12 o'clock that I have used as a reference point 100 times. 42 to the left. I counted by feel, slow. 17 to the right. 9 to the left. Pull. The door swung open without a sound. I took out the items in the order they would pack most efficiently. The gun case first, because it is the largest. the ammunition separately, the flash drive, small, no bigger than my thumb, the stacked cash, which I had rubber banded into 2 rolls, the leather case with my grandfather's watch, the coin case, heavier than you'd think, the satisfying dense weight of 14 pieces of old gold, the 3 envelopes. I had a duffel bag. I want to tell you about the duffel bag, because it is the detail that shows you how long I had been thinking about this. 3 weeks before the night Lydia took those photos, I took a duffel bag out of the hall closet, the one I used to use for weekend trips before we started using rolling luggage, and I put it in my truck, under the back seat, in the footwell. I had packed into it, over the following few days, a change of clothes, my passport, my social security card in a small waterproof sleeve, my backup phone charger, and a folded copy of the most important documents in my business file. I left it there. I said nothing about it. Anyone who has ever done military training, or who has read enough about disaster preparedness, will understand the logic. You do not pack the bag when you need it. You pack it before you need it. The night you need it is the night there is no time. I brought the duffel bag in from the truck when I came home that evening, the evening before the night of the photos. I did not have a plan yet for when I would use it. But the following morning, after watching her come back to bed from the closet at 2 in the morning, the plan was simple and immediate. I packed the items from the safe into the duffel bag. I zipped it slowly. The zipper on that bag is smooth. I had checked it specifically when I first chose it, because a zipper that sticks or catches is no good when quiet matters. Then I did the last thing. I reached back into the now empty safe, found the dial, and reset the combination. I turned it to a sequence I chose at that moment, standing in the dark, by feel. Just a number with no connection to anything. A number I would not forget because I had just chosen it under conditions I would not forget. And a number she would never be able to guess because it meant nothing to anyone in the world except me. In that moment, in the dark, in the closet of a marriage that was already over. I pushed the dial to its new positions. I closed the safe. I felt the latch catch. I replaced the safe on the shelf exactly as it had sat. I took one step back. I felt for the edge of the closet door and slid it back to the inch-open position she had left it. I picked up the duffel bag. I carried it out of the bedroom. Lydia did not move. The house at 3 in the morning had its own particular smell. I notice smells in a way that I am told is unusual. My mother used to say I could detect when she had been baking by the time I came up the driveway. She was right. That night, moving through the house with the duffel bag, what I noticed was the cedar. Lydia had insisted on cedar drawer liners in every closet and dresser in the house, and after 4 years the smell had soaked into the wood of the frames and was part of the air in every room. It is a clean, dry smell that I have always associated with things being in order. On that night, that smell felt like an irony. I went through the kitchen to the garage door. I disarmed the alarm panel on the way. I know the code because I set the system up. I input the bypass sequence, which allows you to open the exterior door without triggering the exit chime. This is a feature I had installed myself for nights when I left early for a client meeting and did not want to wake Lydia. I had used it dozens of times. I had never expected to use it for this. The garage door I raised by hand, manually, by disconnecting it from the motorized drive. The motor makes a grinding sound when it operates. My hands make no sound. I opened the door 3 feet, enough to back the truck out. I put the duffel bag under the rear seat. I rolled the truck back using the slope of the driveway, which faces slightly downhill toward the street, just enough that it moved on its own with the transmission in neutral. I engaged the engine only after I was at the base of the driveway, far enough from the bedroom window that the startup noise was muffled by distance and the neighbor's hedge. I drove to the storage facility. It is 4 miles from the house, on a commercial strip that runs behind a big box retail area. The facility is open 24 hours for keycard access, which was part of why I chose it. The parking lot at 3:45 in the morning was lit by 2 orange sodium lamps that turned everything the color of old photographs. There were 3 other cars in the lot. People who store things, apparently, keep unusual hours. No one looked at me or at my truck. I used the keycard to enter. I walked to the unit. I rolled up the door, which is the kind of corrugated metal that sounds like a freight train when it goes up fast and like nothing when you lift it slowly and evenly. I set the duffel bag inside. I placed the items that needed to stay flat, the envelopes, on top of a plastic bin I had put in the unit on the day I rented it. I arranged everything the way it would need to stay for weeks or months, because I did not know yet how long this would take. I locked the rolling door. I put the keycard in my wallet. I sat in the truck. The orange light came through the windshield and made the dashboard look ancient. I could hear the HVAC units of the storage facility cycling on and off. There was a smell in the cab, machine oil, and the faint leftover smell of the breakfast sandwich I had eaten on a work morning a week ago, and the particular smell of the truck's interior that I have always liked and never been able to describe more precisely than truck. I thought about my grandfather. I do not know exactly why. I think it was the coins. The coins being in the unit, locked behind a rolling metal door in a facility that had no connection to my marriage, felt like something he would have understood. He was a man who believed in physical security, who believed that the weight of real metal in your hand was worth more than a number on a screen, who saved those coins over 40 years of moderate wages and wanted them to go to family. They were going to family. They were staying with me. I drove back to the house. I re-engaged the garage door mechanism. I came in through the kitchen. The cedar smell was still there. The alarm was still bypassed. I rearmed it. I walked back through the house to the bedroom. Lydia had not moved. She was still on her side of the bed, the exact position she had been in when I left. I got back in bed. I did not sleep. Not for the remaining hour and 40 minutes before her alarm went off at 6:30. I lay on my side, facing the ceiling, and I went through the logistics of what came next the way I ran a scenario map on a client problem. Sequentially, looking for gaps, thinking about timing and response, and what the other party was likely to do, and when. By the time her alarm sounded, I had a reasonable map of the next 30 days. I was ready.